Hey, this is Lukas Barfield, and you're tuned into the Cannabis Corner right here on KTAH. Thanks so much for tuning in today. We have a great show planned for you today. We have some headlines coming up, and we have an interview that we're going to be doing with a local cannabis activist on the topic of home grows. And then we will be going out with our It's a Buzz segment. So, again, thanks so much for tuning in. If this is the first time you've tuned into our show, my name is Lukas Barfield. I am a local cannabis activist and researcher and educator. Write for a couple different websites on the topic of cannabis, and actually teach a class at Tacoma Community College, a continuing education class on cannabis. So thanks again for tuning in, and we're going to get right into our headlines today. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to give you a legislative update, kind of what's going on in Olympia, and we're going to be doing this over the next couple shows as we go through the legislative session. And I have a couple different bills that I want to mention. If you might be interested in taking a look at these, you might want to get out a pencil and paper and write this down. So we have two home grow companion bills going through the Washington State Legislature right now. They do have hearings. You can go on the Washington State Legislature website and find out when these hearings are and watch the videos on them. This is HB 1131 and SB 5155. 5155 is going to have its first hearing coming up really soon. 1131 has already had a hearing. And basically what these bills do is they will allow everybody over the age of 21 in the state of Washington to grow up to 6 plants. And there's some debate about possession limits and how they're going to get that all worded, but basically you would be able to possess up to a pound of cannabis. Of course, you cannot do anything with that commercially or anything like that, so we'll be getting more into this later with our guest, but just wanted to let you know about these two bills. And then there's another bill, and I went down and testified on that this week, and it is a bill for medical cannabis patients. As you know, medical cannabis is sort of divided into two parts here in Washington State. We have what's called a qualified patient or authorized patient. So that is an overarching term that means someone who qualifies for medical cannabis, and this is when you go to a naturopath or your doctor, and you'll just get a sheet of paper, a secured sheet of paper, believe it or not, all kind of security features in the paper there, and they write out basically a prescription for you or recommend. Doctors can't prescribe cannabis due to the federal illegality of it, but they can recommend it, and they'll write on there how many plants you get. If you only qualified, so if you only take that step, you can only grow up to 4 plants in the state of Washington. Go on the Department of Health website to get the exact possession limits, but it's basically 3 ounces of usable flower and then a larger amount of extracts and edible cannabis. So that is what's called a qualified patient. And then there is also what's called a registered patient. So once you get qualified, you'll have to take the next step and go to a store here in Tacoma. All the cannabis stores here in Tacoma should be able to provide you with a medical cannabis card. If you come across a store that does not provide you a medical cannabis card, send me an email at lucasbarfield@gmail.com. We'll look into that. But these stores, they'll give you an extra card, and they'll put you on a registry called the Marijuana Authorization Database. And a lot of people don't like this registry. I'm not a big fan of it, but it's just kind of what we're dealing with. This will allow you to get larger possession limits, a sales tax break, and grow 6 to up to 15 plants. No more than 15 plants at your home at any time. Even if you have 2 people there with medical cannabis registrations, you still cannot have any more than 15 plants. Now, I wanted to kind of give you that background because this bill, 5234, will allow patients who are on the registry to get a tax break on Department of Health certified cannabis. So basically cannabis tested for pesticides, the people on the registry will be able to get a 37% tax break on that cannabis, because I don't know if you know that in Washington State you have to have 37% excise tax on every gram of cannabis sold. 30 cents on every dollar is taxed, and then plus you got the sales tax on top of that. So this would allow patients to be able to afford the medicine they need. Believe it or not, there are only 3 farmers in the entire state of Washington that are Department of Health approved. Not saying that there aren't great farmers out there that could be Department of Health approved. They're just not. And so this bill will also kind of try to open up that market to get more of that cannabis on the shelves for cannabis patients that really need the better medicine but is at a higher cost. So that is Bill SB 5234, and they haven't gotten one going in the House, but they're going to try to get that going. And so that's just sort of your legislative update. It's always a good deal to know who your representatives are, no matter what your issue is. So if you're interested in cannabis, maybe call up your legislature and kind of check in with them and see what they think on the bill. So we're going to move on to our next highline. And this is another topic that we cover a lot on this show, and that is pesticides. And this is an article on Purdue researchers are sort of tackling the problem of pesticides. And since the hemp was legalized on the 2018 Farm Bill, now the EPA can classify pesticides for cannabis, so they can look into it. As it stands right now, they couldn't really deal with it because it was federally illegal. Now that hemp is legal, according to the 2018 Farm Bill, they can start testing pesticides on hemp. Now, there have been a lot of red tape delays and governmental problems kind of rolling this stuff out. And believe it or not, they're currently, according to this article in Cannabis Business Times and these Purdue researchers, there is no federally approved pesticides for hemp at the moment. The Purdue researchers say that they are asking for the government to look into this and create pesticide rules. They need some funding to research the pesticides on what works with hemp. And they're really just looking for more policies and procedures when it comes to applying pesticides on hemp. So one of the researchers was saying that people will look up one of his articles and they'll say, okay, this is what you need to treat powdery mildew on these other plants. And then they'll take that same information and go over and treat their cannabis. Now, as we spoke last show with Casey Connell of Contender Gardens, and if you've ever seen or handled any kind of cannabis flower, the pesticides is not like an apple where you can just wash the pesticides off. And as the researchers point out, and a lot of people point out too, you're not smoking apples. And so some of the problems arise is because the cannabis industry, they're just kind of out there on their own. They don't have any guidance for anyone because it's federally illegal. And of course, as we know, cannabis still has that taboo. So a lot of people in the cannabis industry might not want to reach out to a university and talk to them. And people at the university might not want to talk to the people with cannabis because people still have their bias. So there has been a lack of exposure of the cannabis community, according to these researchers, to pesticide protocols and what just regular farmers know about pesticides. And they're calling for more education of cannabis farmers so that they will know, because just because you're using pesticides on one plant does not mean that transfers over to cannabis. And they really see this as a big problem. And this is something that in Washington State we have a problem with. Washington State is the only state that has legal adult use cannabis that does not test for pesticides. And as I just mentioned, the only cannabis in the state of Washington that is actually 100% tested for pesticides is the Department of Health stamped cannabis. And that, as I said, there's only 3 farms in the entire state that go through that protocol. So we are way behind the curve on this pesticide issue, and you really need to ask for the accompanying materials when you go into these stores. Educate yourself. The more the consumers ask, and push the stores to have the materials on hand about what pesticides are being used. That information will filter back down to the growers. If people suspect that cannabis has pesticides on it and then they're not buying the products, hopefully the market will kind of take care of their growers, and those people will be out of business because they can't sell the cannabis because it has the pesticides on it. So big issue here in Washington. Sounds like a lot of the rest of the country has been sort of taking a little ahead of this than we are. However, there still is a lot of problems with testing cannabis for pesticides. So just be aware. Next article we're going to move on is on Massachusetts, and it has officially rolled out its cannabis system in the end of 2018, and they're running into some problems. Now, as you know, they legalized cannabis in 2016 for adult use, and when they first opened, they had $15 million worth of sales in 6 weeks in only 2 stores, and then it expanded to 3 stores. Now they're expanding out to 4 to 8 stores a month, and it's spreading like wildfire over there in Massachusetts. But they're running into problems because, first of all, there's no banking, so they're having a hard time getting the stores and all the financing they need. And then they are having the same problem that a lot of these states have, which is the local problem. So a lot of times the local municipalities give cannabis industry the biggest problems, not necessarily the state. In Massachusetts and I believe California as well, they have what is called a host community agreement, an HCA. So before you go and get your cannabis license, even with the state, you have to have one of these host community agreements, and you have to show it to the state before they will grant you a license. Now, I don't think we have one here in Washington. If we do, I'm not aware of it. I'm pretty sure that the local communities, they just handle it on their own. They're just like Yakima County. They're like, we're banned. You can't come here. And something like Seattle, they're just like, okay, you can set up shop, but here's the guidelines. And so they're running into problems because the local communities are basically extorting the cannabis industry for money. They're trying to get in on this green rush, and they're making exclusive deals with certain growers and certain retailers, and so it's really becoming a problem with these host community agreements. So Massachusetts is moving forward on this cannabis legalization, which is a big deal in Massachusetts. It's one of the first states on the East Coast that's rolling out a 100% adult use cannabis. Maine and Vermont has it, but their systems are sort of in a gray area. So keep an eye on what's going on over there in Massachusetts. I still think that Massachusetts kind of has one of the best cannabis systems in the country as far as the regulations and really opening it up to a wide variety of people. I believe they have like 10 different licenses that you can get there in Massachusetts, as opposed to Washington, which at the moment only has 4. So moving on to our next article, or next topic is in Florida. Florida legalized medical cannabis in 2016. They have rolled out their system, but one of the big problems in Florida is, and the hashtag is "No Smoke is a Joke," is when they passed the bill, the amendment passed in Florida for medical cannabis was 71% of the vote. But then when it went up to Tallahassee to get the approval, and they actually have, same here in Washington, when you have an initiative, that's just one thing. But then the legislature has to actually pick that initiative up and go and make law to sort of reflect the will of the people. Well, there in Florida, somehow in the bill, they put in the medical cannabis regulations that you cannot buy just regular cannabis flower. So for all intents and purposes, you can't buy weed in Florida because you can't, or legally. All the weed you're going to get, when I say weed, I mean like the bud, the flower that you usually get. Any of that you get in Florida is still going to be, even if you're a medical patient, it's still going to be on the underground market. And they did do a court case against this. They sued John Morgan, one of the main sponsors of the bill. They sued and said, no, we got to be able to smoke cannabis. That's the main thing. I mean, they'll let you vape cannabis and you can get extracts and things like that. And I believe some are starting to roll out edibles, but just nothing to roll a joint or smoke a bowl, or just the usual ways of consuming cannabis. And the state, Rick Scott, the now Senator Rick Scott from Florida, he kept blocking it and said, nope, can't smoke. And they have a new governor that came in, and he is saying, and he's actually a Republican, and he's saying, okay, the will of the people was not followed with this, and he's going to roll back the smoking ban. As a matter of fact, he's just going to stop appealing that court case, and then there will be no smoking. But then people in Florida will actually be able to start buying usable or just flowered cannabis. So great news out of Florida. And now we're going to be getting into our topic for today. Yeah, hey, and then for our topic today, we have another guest. And this week we have John Kingsbury in with Homegrow Washington, and he's going to talk to us about home grows and what is going on in the state of Washington with this. There is actually a home grow bill in Olympia right now, and he's going to tell us all about it. He's been working on this, and we're going to talk about home grows, what they are, and what's going on with them in Washington and actually around the country. So how you doing today, John?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to see you, man. And I'm really excited about the work you've been doing. We first met a couple years ago in the working on medical cannabis, and then you've since moved on to home grows. Kind of define what we mean when we say. So I know a lot of people know all about the medical system, and they know that people grow medically. But tell us about what it means, adult use or recreational home grow. What is that all about?
So what that is just use for any growing for any adult for their own personal use. It's a non-commercial activity. It's small scale, and I guess the best comparison would be to home brewing. Home brewing a beer would be the best comparison for what we're talking about here.
Yeah, because everybody in the state here, you can brew a little small batch of beer, and I know some people who do wine too, and nobody has any kind of problem with that. So we're just kind of assuming that, well, if that's the way for beer, then let's have it for cannabis too. And then, am I right or wrong? Somebody was telling me that Washington is the only state in the country with legal adult use cannabis that does not have home grows. Is that true?
That is correct. Well, we were first in legalizing recreational use. We are still behind the ball as far as legalizing recreational home grows. We are the only state. I think there's 10 others, or there's 9 other states, and then even Washington, D.C. permits home growing. So the average size of a garden is 6 plants, the average allowance. Michigan allows 12, Colorado allows 12, and Oregon allows 4. But all the other states permit 6 plants, which is sort of a low number, but we're trying to stay real middle of the road to make sure that the legislature is calm and not freaked out about this. So we are not pushing any barriers here by any means.
Yeah, and that's just really shocking to me because Washington is known as a leader in cannabis. Even when I was living in the South, everybody knew that one of the places you wanted to look in the country for leadership when it came to cannabis was Washington. And now here we are sort of in 10th place when it comes to our cannabis laws. And I think a big reason is because people can't grow at home. And so if we can start growing at home, I mean, who's going to benefit from this, in your opinion? Tell me who you think will get the most out of this.
Well, this is not a medical bill, but I certainly believe patients will benefit. In the way that they would benefit from this would be, right now, medical growing, even if you join the registry, even if you have a valid authorization, is not technically legal. It is illegal with an affirmative defense in some cases, and so there's a legal reason why that is for on the behalf of law enforcement. But I think also too, who would really benefit is the industry. If you look at, say, the microbrew industry, that came up from people who started growing or brewing at home, who were very enthusiastic, and it's been sort of a laboratory for the robust homebrew or microbrew industry we have now. That's why you can go into the shop or the bar and you can buy lots of varieties of beer. Whereas, maybe 30 years ago, it was more like you had your Budweiser and your Coors. So I think the industry will also benefit. And the other thing too is, probably most people who grow at home will do it because they want the hobby. They're interested in the plants. They want to see how that's done. Some people will do it consistently through the years. I believe some people will try it for a year and realize it's really hard work and probably go to the store more often. So really those 3 groups. I think over the long run, the industry will really benefit from it. Certainly patients will benefit from it because this will be a legal activity and not, affirmative defense or, whatever that is. So that will really help for patients for whom 6 plants is adequate. And, anybody, any adult really who is interested in the art of growing or they have a curiosity about it, I think they'll benefit as well.
Yeah, I really think so too. And it really kind of is holding us back. On the testimony the other day, I was really shocked to see the guy that had the gardening store that was testifying how many gardening businesses have closed down. And you can pretty much directly tie that into medical cannabis when they made it so much harder to become a medical cannabis patient. So many people around the state stopped growing, and so there's definitely a market out there for people to grow, or a niche for people to grow. And you're totally right. I mean, I saw Ann Rivers when we first got the medical cannabis thing going, talking about how these plants are like 8-10 feet tall, and you can get like pounds and pounds off of them.
Right.
But I mean, you really have to be an expert grower, and it takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of failure. And if you're growing over here on the west side of the mountains, you're more than likely going to be growing indoors, and then you can take how complicated it is growing outdoors and then multiply that times 1,000 as far as the complication indoors. So I really don't think, although we're going to get a really big benefit out of it, there's just not going to be a lot of downsides to this.
Well, I think part of the fear has been that suddenly if we legalize it, everybody will get in and grow. I hear cannabis people say, well, it's just like growing tomatoes. Well, if you've grown cannabis, it's not really like growing tomatoes. You can throw a few seeds in the ground and do that, but the quality of the product you're going to get is probably going to be less than what you could buy cheaply at the store. So there's that. To do it well actually takes a lot of practice and a lot of learning and a lot of mistakes and some money, and it takes space. So it's not, I have brewed beer and I have grown plants, and I'll tell you, brewing beer, as much expertise as it can take, is a lot easier than growing cannabis well, in my opinion.
Yeah, because the beer, you just throw stuff in a barrel and kind of let it go. And cannabis, you got to be checking on every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you just turn your back for 1 second, the whole thing goes wrong. So kind of let's get into the specifics of what we have going on down in Olympia in the 2019 session. So we have 2 bills, and they are out there. And if I'm not correct, that is House Bill 1131. And tell us what the Senate bill is, and then kind of give us a little rundown of the 2 bills as far as how many plants. I know you mentioned 6 plants, but kind of give us a little more in-depth view of the 2 bills down in Olympia.
Sure. So we have what are called companion bills. And what companion bills are is one version, one bill or set of language in the House, and you mentioned that's 1131. We also have a companion bill, and what that means is that there's matching language in a bill on the Senate side, and that's 5155. So those are identical bills, and that will be getting, the Senate bill will actually be getting a hearing next Friday, the 31st, at the time of this recording, and this is the first time that we've ever had a hearing on the Senate side. We've gotten bills introduced, but we've never actually moved the ball forward that way. And what I'm really proud of and optimistic about is that we seem to bring a stronger game every year. We're not going away. Last year was the first year we got a Senate companion bill. This is the first year we're going to get a hearing on the Senate side. And last year we had 2 sponsors for the House bill, and this year we have 10, which really shows that the momentum is there. We can't have that this year. So let me describe what the bills are. We permit 6 plants, or the bill permits 6 plants. Now that number comes basically from political, it's sort of a political safety zone. It's not ideal in my mind, but we wanted to be the reasonable person in the room, so we picked a number that most other states have, and that's all that's based on. So this is a lot more complicated. A number that's often been up for contention, we got a lot more complicated on that this year, which poses certain political problems, but I need to describe what it means. So you have 6 plants, and there's usually what's called a harvest limit, which is, okay, you grow, you harvest, how much can you hold, right? Because you don't want people holding. If people are holding 20 pounds, they're likely to divert that product. That means that they're likely to sell it or ship it out of state, and that's not what this bill is about. This is about personal use. On the other hand, when you're growing 6 plants, you have to say, well, how much can you reasonably grow from that? And the problem with that is you may be growing a plant at home in your home garden, or you may be growing a fairly large plant if you're growing outdoors, particularly in eastern Washington. So In past bills, there have been a number. Last year's bill was 24 ounces. That was the maximum you could hold before you got in the illegal zone. The problem with that we often heard from people from Eastern Washington talk about is, 24 ounces from a couple large plants is more than or less than we're going to be able to harvest. And while if you're growing indoors, you may get multiple crops a year. If you're growing outdoors in Eastern Washington, you may get one crop a year. You get your crop, and then that's all you get all year. And so we were talking about, how do we make this equitable? How do we let people harvest what they're growing and not, if they're acting in good faith, if they're just harvesting for their personal use, how do they not harvest and then immediately be on the wrong side of the law? So what we did this year is really, really different in that whatever you harvest from your 6 plants, you get to keep. That's yours, right? So if you grow a big tree in Eastern Washington, or you're growing smaller plants, multiple crops per year in Western Washington in the indoors, you get to keep that. What we've done to protect from diversion or from accumulation is the word that we use, because we don't want people storing up a bunch of plant material and then being tempted to sell that, is we have what's called an accumulation limit. So, and that limit is 16 ounces. And here's how that works. And if this is complicated or you don't understand, then stop me and I'll try and explain.
Keep going.
So the number we set was 16 ounces of an accumulation limit. So, for example, say you harvest your 6 plants, or you harvest 4 of your 6 plants, and you end up with 24 ounces. You cannot harvest another crop again until your 16 ounces are below. And that should keep people from accumulating and then being tempted to divert and having large stocks of cannabis. Now, I'm in favor of having large stocks of cannabis, but we don't want to turn this into a commercial activity. We don't want people to abuse it. This is really for personal use.
Right.
So let's say that you're growing at home and you have 18 ounces and you've gone ahead and you've replanted, and you go, oh my gosh, I have more than 16 ounces. But I want to harvest the next crop. This is a new variety of strains I'm trying, or I may need more in the future, or whatever. Here's what you have to do. If you have an extra 4 ounces or 5 ounces, you give it away. You have a party. You give it, the law lets you give away cannabis a half an ounce at a time. Yep. So you'll have to get rid of your excess, and then you can harvest that. What you can't do is you can't sell it. A lot of people, growing is hard work. So a lot of people will say, gosh, this harvest that I have here, I've harvested 24 ounces or 32 ounces. This will last me for, months. So I'm not going to replant right now. So that's how that works. That's a 16 ounce limit before you can harvest a new crop. And we call that an accumulation limit. Okay. So other elements of the bill are, there was a really good issue brought up about seizure and forfeiture. And so the Controlled Substances Act says that if you have 5 or more plants, or if you have more than 16 ounces of flower, that your property is subject to seizure and forfeiture. So the thing is, if you say to people, it is now legal to grow 6 plants and to hold whatever those plants can produce, how do you say that's legal, and yet we can take your stuff if you have 6 or more plants and more than 16 ounces? So there was an excellent suggestion made to address the seizure and forfeiture of the Controlled Substances Act. And what's in that section of the bill is just an exemption. And that exemption basically says that if you're engaged in the activity that's defined under the law in the home growing bill, then you are exempt from those sections of the Controlled Substances Act. And I'll give you an example of how that works. If you are a 502 producer, you have presumably far more than 5 plants and far more than 16 ounces. Yeah. Yet you are not subject to seizure and forfeiture. And what the mechanism for that is to say is a very short couple of sentences that basically says, activities engaged in under this section of the law are exempt from seizure and forfeiture under the Controlled Substances Act. And that's how you can have thousands of plants as a 502 producer and not be at threat of having that seized. Another example is if you are a medical patient and you're following within the law, you are exempt from that. You are exempt from that seizure and forfeiture. So that's another part of the bill. That was actually a new addition this year, which strangely makes so much sense, but hadn't been considered before. So that's an important protection for people at home, because the whole point of this is to make people not afraid, to normalize cannabis use, to decriminalize it. I personally did not vote for 502 myself. I had some concerns about what would happen to patients, but I agreed with the overall principle of 502 that we need to take the criminality out of it. We should not be putting people in jail for a plant or threatening to take their property. And so I think we need to carry that on into this home grow bill and make people not afraid that if they're engaged in an activity that doesn't hurt anybody, that should be enjoyable and not fearful, that we need to do everything that we can to further that cause. So, and then there's some other little technical fixes in it. But that's the essence of the bill. Is that a thorough explanation?
Yeah.
Okay.
That sounds real good. And there's a lot to it, and it's one of the consequences of cannabis just being illegal for so long that it has been, and it still is really it's really complicated to unravel all these legalese.
Yeah.
And,
absolutely.
Kind of undo the drug war and this regime of I just call it terror by the government, basically going after people all these years. And you're right. By letting people grow it at home, then it kind of just becomes something normal that people just grow at their house, and then they have an extra bunch of tomatoes. They just give away the tomatoes. Same thing will be with the cannabis. Down in California, it's actually written in the law and it just says you're allowed to have the amount of cannabis that you grow off the plants that you have.
Right.
And I have a friend down in Oregon. He grows plants, and then whatever he has left over, he'll just take, like you said, and he'll just give it away to his friends or have a party, and just does it that way. So,
right.
It really sounds like you guys have covered all the bases. And you were telling me before we went on the air that you were really optimistic about this. So just talk to us about the feeling down in the legislature, and do you think this will make it through? And what about Governor Inslee? You think he'll be signing it?
So I think that provides a really good segue what we're talking about, which is normalization and how is this working in the legislature. Do I think this will pass? I think it can pass. It cannot pass without work being put in. It's going to take work, and I'm doing as much effort as I can to make sure that happens, because this criminalization needs to end. When you think about the social harms of cannabis compared to the social harms of beer, in my personal opinion, there's no contest. So we need to bring those more in line. What I have really noticed this year that's quite a bit different from previous years is that the legislature is starting to relax. They're starting to realize the sky's not going to fall. They're starting to realize, the relative harmlessness of cannabis compared to, say, alcohol, which is widely available. It's not without consequences, but I've never heard of anybody ODing on cannabis, or people don't seem to get intoxicated on cannabis and shoot their spouses, or some of the stuff that can happen with other recreational drugs, or including alcohol. So what I've noticed is that prohibition has become a habit. We've been engaged in it for so long that a lot of it is just getting people to relax and change the habit of prohibition. Yeah. And let me give you an example of that. In the home grow hearing for the House bill recently, the police got up, the law enforcement lobby got up, and they said, they tried to conflate home grow activity with large 3,000 plant gardens. and these large, what really are criminal activities for money, sometimes involving bad people. And I think when I listen to them, I realize their arguments get weaker and weaker every year. And I think they're just in the habit of prohibition, and they need to come to a place where they go, okay, this is an allowed activity. The social harms are relatively mild, and we just need to give up the presumption that somehow this is surrounded by criminality. I really experienced that presumption particularly in 2014, 2015, when, as a medical cannabis patient myself, I noticed that people like me that are highly qualified were being talked about like potential criminals and almost like nothing else. Not like people with a medical need, nothing like that, but as a potential social threat.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a 70, 80-year habit we have. What I've seen this year is that seems to be drifting away. Normalization is happening in Washington State. And I've really noticed that in the legislature. And let me give you a concrete example of that. Last year, we had 2 co-signers on the House bill. This year, we have 10. That's remarkable.
That is.
The legislators who don't sign, and I hear this all the time, say, if you get this to the floor, I will vote for this. I don't want my name on it.
Yeah.
Because I think I'll get political flack, even though I do support it. I hear that all the time this year. That 10 co-sponsor number this year means that a lot of legislators are losing the concern that their name is on the bill. And that's, for people like you and me, for whom cannabis is more normalized, that may seem sort of a backward view or, sort of a slow bus to legalization. But in the political world where you're hearing from everyone, that's a pretty big change. And it's a really good marker for how different things are becoming. And I think it goes to normalization, losing the habit of prohibition, people relaxing. I think the key to getting this to pass is to get people to relax and realize the sky will not fall. I cannot tell you how often, once legislators become comfortable with me, they'll lean over and they'll say, yeah, I enjoy cannabis.
Yeah.
I hear that from a majority of legislators I talk to. And I find that incredibly hopeful because really, when you want social change, when you want people to relax, what you have to do is you have to convince them that you and they are essentially similar. And I have seen that, and I do not think that we will get there without a lot of work this year. I am determined to do whatever it takes because, frankly, I'm tired of coming back every year. Jay Inslee has not been friendly to cannabis. Something that happens in the legislature is people will quietly send orders down the ladder. This is what's happened to us in the past, where leadership says, okay, you can pass that through your committee, but then you're going to send it over to Rules, and Rules will send it to Finance, and Finance will park it, and it'll never get heard from again. Our job, our biggest job this year is to make sure that doesn't happen, to make sure people up the food chain say, we're not going away. This will be okay. Nobody will get hurt. The tax base won't collapse. And you won't get a lot of political flack for it. That's a lot of work to do. We need to talk to everybody. I think there are things that we can do as activists. The most important thing that we can do as activists is when we go and talk to legislators and talk to policymakers, we demonstrate to them that we're normal, reasonable people, just like their neighbors. If we go in screaming with our hair on fire, they're going to be afraid. They're going to say, oh, those potheads, they're all crazy. And we're not. Most of us are adults. Most of us have had children or have children now. And this should be a small part of our life. This isn't a major part of our life. And have that calming effect by saying, I'm like you, you're like me. And I think we're being successful that year because I'm having legislators lower their voices a little and say, yeah, I enjoy cannabis once in a while. And that's the progress I see this year that I've never seen before. And so I'm incredibly optimistic that this could be the year that we finally catch up with the other states, catch up with Washington, D.C., and, be able to engage in an activity that's perfectly reasonable for responsible adults.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And I really think that Inslee running for president is actually or he hasn't officially announced, but everybody's pretty much saying that he is.
Yeah.
I really think that's a good thing for us this year because he's really trying to put a list of things that he's for and what he's done. And in my opinion, having that, some people might think it's a little small thing, but having Washington kind of stand out there by itself, it's like we're the only state that doesn't allow the home grows. It's kind of not a good look for him as far as his campaign goes. So I think that might have been, there's probably other reasons too, but that could be one of the reasons why he hasn't sent something down the food chain saying, hey, let's put a stop to this. Now, people driving around Tacoma and they're listening to us, what can just the regular, everyday person do here? We are in the, I think we broadcast in the 27th, 28th, and 29th LDs, and possibly the 30th as well.
So, as a form of shorthand, what I would say to you, say to those people who want to do something, is the best thing that you can do is write a short, reasonable, concise email to your legislators and just say, I support the reasonable use. I support home growing, recreational home growing, on a small scale for people's personal use. So they understand what the context is, which is personal use. I think you don't need to go into a long explanation. They just need to hear that you are out there and you exist. I think it's you don't want to yell at people or demand. I think the decor, you have to talk to them like you're talking to your neighbor that you want to get along with.
Yeah.
One thing legislators really need to know is if I do this thing and I get flack for it, are my constituents going to have my back? Yeah. I think there are a lot of legislators that would be fine to allow home growing and then move on to other important issues. What they fear is there's going to be a few groups that scream and shout at them because they're sending their kids to hell, or they're going to unleash terror from intoxicated drivers on the highway. They're going to get a little bit of that. And what you can do is you can let your legislators know that if they take this step, if they support your right to grow a few plants at home, that you're going to have their back. And that is sort of the antidote, the political antidote for them to make that leap. And I think that's really important. Now, what you can do, you may not know how to get to your legislator. You may not, there is a page online that'll help you get there. If you would like to write to me at Homegrow Washington, that's one word, homegrowwashington@gmail.com, I will let you know who your legislator is. I will ask you what your zip code is, where you live, or I will send you a link to what's called a district finder, which basically will tell you who your legislators are. And I will give you an idea of maybe what to say. I don't think you need to write a 5-page email. I think 3 lines is adequate for most people because they just want to know that you're there, what you want, and that you have their back if they get flack. So I would encourage you to write to us at homegrowwashington@gmail.com. Or if you don't want to do that, you can Google what's called a district finder, Washington legislature, and Google should bring that up, a page where you enter your address and they'll tell you who your legislators are. And you can send them a nice 3-page or a 3-sentence email that says, I hope you will support bills 1131 in the House or 5155 in the Senate. So I'm glad to help you in any way you can. If you need me to sort of take you by the arm and walk you through the process, I am committed to doing that to everybody who's interested in participating in this, because I really think that that's the only way it's going to happen is if people participate. So I'm committed to helping people participate.
Yeah, and I think there are a lot of people out there, not a lot, but there are people around Tacoma who want to see this pass. As you know, I'm teaching this class over at Tacoma Community College on cannabis. It's a comprehensive overview, and I have people ask me, hey, can you show me how to grow, or can you tell me this or tell me that, or about how to grow cannabis? And right now we can't because not everybody can grow. And so we really need to open this up and get it normalized. So this is a great opportunity that we have John on Radio Tacoma here. John, we're going to be heading out here in a second. Is there anything else we left out or anything else you want to mention before we sign off here?
So I would like to say that I think that home growing would be an excellent thing to have. Let me tell you how I've personally benefited beyond just being a patient. When I became curious about growing at home, I had learned about food, I learned about pH, I learned about light frequencies. I ended up learning about electrical wiring. It takes a certain level of curiosity and determination to do. And, I think when people get curious about things, when they're interested in how things are done, when they start learning new skills, and there's a lot of new skills to learn when you're growing cannabis, I think that's good for everyone. It's good for people's minds. It's good for it's good for the mental environment. And I think that we should always encourage people to better themselves and learn new skills and pursue their curiosities. So I think it would be a very good thing to have. I'd also say that, one of the issues in the 502 market, and that's not to trash the 502 market, is there's a profound pesticide problem right now. And for me, somebody with compromised health, I want to know exactly what's going on in my plants, because my body's going to react strongly to them. So for someone like me, it's really essential. And I shouldn't, and you shouldn't have to be in fear if you're engaging in home growing because of concerns like that. So I think it's an important civil right. I really encourage you to participate. I am committed to helping you participate. The legislative process can be intimidating for some people. You'll get over that very quickly. I'm happy that you're listening to this show. I think if we go about this in a smart, thoughtful way, in a way that's calming to the legislation, to the legislators, and to Governor Inslee, I think we can get there this year. And I'll tell you, 2 years ago, I wasn't so sure that's going to happen. But this year, I am very confident that it can. So I hope you will participate. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming in today, John, and great information there. John's a great advocate for cannabis here in the state of Washington. We're going to get out of here and move on to our last segment of the show. And now we're going to be getting into our It's a Bus segment, and this comes out of the state of South Carolina, the Palmetto State. So it is in Berkeley County. 2 men were arrested for 896 pounds of cannabis at a warehouse. The police said they saw suspicious activity at a warehouse. What would that be? A forklift carrying a big, huge bale of weed? I mean, sheesh. They staked the place out. They saw the men come to the warehouse. They got some warrants, and then they made the bust. They say that it's $4 million worth on the street. And they also found some guns and over $3,000 in cash. And what's really going to get these guys is the guns with the cannabis. Anytime you have a gun with any kind of drug crime, it triples the crime. So, just some more guys caught up in the drug war. They apparently have some other issues in with drugs in Charleston. So, we really need to take a better look at our drug policy. This is the Cannabis Corner, so I'm sticking to cannabis, but our overall drug policies in the United States, overall drugs, is a really big mess. So thank you so much for tuning in. And if you like our show, check us out on all the social media places. MJ is Medicine. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
This is Cannabis Corner, hosted by Lukas Barfield. If you would like to get in contact with your host, he is on Twitter at MJisMedicine. Your musical selection is The Happy Monster by Chubby Jackson and his orchestra, recorded on 78 in 1947. You can find this music and much more at the Great 78 Project, an archive of historical music recordings at great78.archive.org. You are listening to 101.9 KTAH, Radio Tacoma.